that we didn't really have names for yet. And when I was in my teens, he started doing socials and karaoke out in the Interlake where I grew up, and fell in love with Elvis tribute artists. Being paying homage to the king of rock and roll, and the crowds loving it, and connecting with audiences not only here, but he's been to Collingwood, in Ontario, Penticton in BC, all over Canada and the US. And it really unlocked this superpower he has in him now. No longer a shy guy, and fantastically fun to watch on stage. He really gives it all out there to the audience.
So how does it feel for you to have this opportunity to share the stage with your father?
Honestly, he's my hero. I love him so much, and we've had some issues with our family. We've had some challenges in the past few years, and of course, with 2020 and beyond, live performance has been a struggle for a lot of us, comedians, actors, musicians alike. So the opportunity to be back on stage, not only doing something I love, but sharing that stage with a person who I love. And seeing him come alive on the stage with the audience, handing out teddy bears and being silly and singing to the swooning ladies, can't help falling in love. It's a truly special experience. So yeah, sharing the stage with my hero, can't get much better than that.
Quinn Green, thank you so much for sharing this story with me, and have a blast tomorrow.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
For the Israeli military, the past 24 hours have marked the worst single-day losses the military suffered. Meantime, rain, cold, flooding, plaguing one of the refugee encampments in Gaza. We'll bring you the latest from the region when CBC Winnipeg News returns. Fighting has been fierce in southern and northern Gaza today, less than a day after the UN passed a non-binding resolution calling for a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war. Israel suffered one of the deadliest days for its soldiers in the conflict, and in southern Gaza, the humanitarian crisis just keeps getting worse. Sasha Petrusek has more on the story.
Battles fought amid Gaza's urban rubble turned deadly for Israel as soldiers were ambushed in areas considered subdued. 9 were killed here alone. That included 2 senior commanders who were laid to rest today. They are the worst losses in more than a month of fighting, coming as Israel's leadership feels the pressure. Political pressure from the families of more than 100 hostages still held by Hamas.
We came here for a strong message that to bring all hostages home now.
Con molta preoccupazione.
International pressure as the Pope added his voice to an overwhelming vote at the UN for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, from a world shocked by the death toll. Most Israelis say they see no choice.
It's awful that there's so many civilian casualties, and if we could, we're doing our very best to try and avoid them. But this is war, and that's what happens in war.
What's happening in Gaza is more death. These are children being killed, he says, innocents. And more misery for the survivors. We have the suffering of war, he says, and now the cold weather and winter. There's little food or medicine. The one UNICEF shipment was allowed in to a hospital today. For almost 2 million uprooted Palestinians, say UN officials.
I have to say, it is a living hell.
Still, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is defiant. In the face of great pain and international pressure, he told commanders, we will fight until victory. Sasha Petrusek, CBC News, Toronto.
In Israel, political divisions are growing over the direction of the war with Hamas. Increasingly, as you heard, anger is being directed at Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Many Israelis, including relatives of the hostages, have criticized the government for failing to stop the October 7th attacks. Margaret Evans has this report from Jerusalem.
No love lost here for Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's wartime leader blamed by the crowd for failings they say allowed Hamas to stage its October 7th massacre. Maoz Inon's parents were killed when the militants fired a shoulder-launched rocket at their house.
They promised us security, they promised us governance, and they totally failed, like no other government in the history of Israel.
It's not a huge demonstration, but opinion polls support their calls for Netanyahu's resignation. Some 70% of Israelis want him to go now or right after the war. Many in the crowd were already pushing for his exit. In massive protests earlier in the year against his government's efforts to clip the wings of Israel's Supreme Court.
We're here now because this government doesn't want to finish the war. Netanyahu wants to go on because he's afraid of the day after.
Yesterday, Netanyahu rejected Washington's hopes for the day after the Gaza war, including a path to a two-state solution. It speaks to his base, including Isaac Blazer.
I can tell you that I vehemently oppose the two-state solution. I don't want to see it here. And in my opinion, I don't think there is such a thing as a Palestinian people.
But it also speaks to heightened Israeli fears in the wake of the Hamas attacks.
There isn't just, the good fellows that are promoting a two-state solution and those who are trying to undermine it. There are serious questions and challenges of how to manage this day after.
That doesn't mean Israelis will trust Netanyahu. His policy of propping up Hamas at the expense of the Palestinian Authority to undermine peace talks is now an open secret.
He is seen as being personally responsible for the policies that strengthened Hamas over the last 15 years. That he cannot undo, even if he turns around and destroys them.
One more reason for him to go, says Maoz Inon, who wants Western governments, including Canada, to stop supporting what he calls Netanyahu's extremist government.
We must have international conference that both Israeli and Palestinian will be invited, but we must have international intervention.
Regaining Palestinian trust after the devastating losses Israel has inflicted on Gaza is by no means a given either. Margaret Evans, CBC News, Jerusalem.
Canada voted in support of that UN resolution calling for a humanitarian ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war. That marked a shift from years of voting with Israel. As Rafi Boudjikanian reports, that change has angered some big supporters of the Liberal Party and caused a serious split within the Liberal caucus.
At the Liberals' annual holiday party Tuesday night, an admission from the Prime Minister.
What's happening in the Middle East is reverberating around the world, across Canada, and within our Liberal Party. I've spoken with many of you personally, and I know how extremely difficult it has been.
By Wednesday morning, those conversations no longer internal.
The humanitarian crisis in Gaza has worsened. Nearly 2 million people are displaced. We have seen over 18,000 innocent civilians being killed, 70% of which are children and women. As a mother, it has been very difficult for me in the last 2 months to see all those pictures coming up.
I'm disappointed in this vote. The motion is the motion. The motion was an unconditional call for a ceasefire. I do not support an unconditional call for a ceasefire.
All this after Canada sided with a majority of countries at the United Nations in voting for a humanitarian ceasefire, following weeks of the government saying it wouldn't go there, leaving the U.S. one of Israel's few allies at the General Assembly.
The continued loss of civilian life is just intolerable and unacceptable. The United States does not believe that a ceasefire is the way to accomplish that objective. There were issues with that resolution.
Back in Ottawa, Trudeau said the ceasefire would take both sides laying down their arms.
We're going to keep participating in urgent international efforts towards a sustainable ceasefire. We need to see it stop using civilians as human shields. And there cannot be any future role for Hamas in the governance of Gaza. In the meantime, we're going to continue to press and work with international partners towards a two-state solution where Palestinians and Israelis can live in peace and security in internationally recognized border.
All this as the U.S. and the United Kingdom announced sanctions against Hamas today. No word on Canada moving in that direction. Trudeau simply saying his government is considering all the tools at its disposal. Rafi Boudjikanian, CBC News, Ottawa.
A new report from Statistics Canada shows the amount Canadians owe relative to their income has dipped slightly. On average, Canadians now owe $1.82 in debt for every dollar of disposable household income. Believe it or not, that's a slight improvement from the previous quarter. But the cost of servicing debt has crept higher. The cost of borrowing has risen since the Bank of Canada started raising interest rates last year, an effort to fight inflation. Canada's Human Rights Commission is facing a crisis of confidence. That's according to a new Senate report, a document in response to complaints of anti-Black racism filed by some of the Commission's own employees. CBC's David Thurton has the story.
We could have a better
Bernadette Becci continues to work at the Canadian Human Rights Commission, despite the toll it's taking on her and others.
There's no real changes yet. Employees of the Commission, myself, are still looking and they're still waiting for the systemic changes that we asked for.
A Senate committee report backs up her claims that Anti-black racism and other forms of discrimination are pervasive at the Human Rights Commission and also throughout the federal public service.
We're not talking about a minor issue here. This is major.
According to the report, the discrimination at the Canadian Human Rights Commission could plunge it and its mission into a crisis of confidence.
How can you expect any black Canadian in this country who's experiencing anti-black racism and has a case that they should be able to take to the Canadian Human Rights Commission when there's no confidence in the Commission's ability to handle their case? That's the crisis of confidence.
The study came after several past and present employees first spoke out exclusively to CBC News, alleging the Commission was a toxic place for racialized staff. They also alleged that all-white teams worked on human rights cases involving racism and tended to dismiss them at a higher rate than others. A workplace labor grievance determined the Commission discriminated against workers.
Canada should be ashamed that it has a Human Rights Commission that is discriminating against citizens, against its own workers.
Responding to the new report, the Canadian Human Rights Commission says it's committed to doing what is necessary to ensure that everyone in Canada can trust in the Commission to conduct its work with integrity and accountability. The Commission and the Justice Minister are still reviewing the Senate's report.
We have to take these allegations seriously. I know the Canadian Human Rights Commission has made some preliminary comments in that regard and rooting out systemic discrimination of any kind, but particularly anti-black racism.
Workers and the Senate have called for an independent review on the conditions that black and racialized workers face at the Commission. So far, no commitment yet from the Justice Minister to undertake one. David Thornton, CBC News, Ottawa.
For the first time in 70 years, a different monarch's face is now on Canadian coins. Coming up, we'll get the reaction from some of the first Canadians to receive the coins. You're watching CBC Winnipeg News. You know, it may seem a little odd the first time you hold one, because for the first time in 7 decades, there's now the image of a different monarch on Canadian coins. The Royal Canadian Mint held a coin exchange yesterday to give people the chance to get their hands on some of the first loonies, the first toonies that bear a portrait of King Charles. CBC's Nicole Williams reports.
Inside the Royal Canadian Mint, people lined up all day, eagerly waiting to get their hands on one of these.
Well, it's certainly different.
In exchange for $3.40, people got $3.40, all Canadian coins that now bear the effigy of King Charles III.
It's, you know, the first new coin in 70 years to feature a different monarch, so it's very significant. It's, you know, it's a historic change to our coins, and people want to be a part of that.
It's the first time in 70 years a king has been featured on Canada's toonies, loonies, quarters, nickels and dimes. Since 1953, Queen Elizabeth II was the familiar face on Canadian coins.
It feels weird, but because, you know, for most of my life, she's the only monarch I've known.
Now these coins are entering circulation just 7 months after the coronation of King Charles, an unprecedented timeline for the Royal Canadian Mint.
We're not just dealing with the Government of Canada and the Department of Finance, to whom we report, and the King himself, you know, gave the nod to his portrait. So all these people had to align.
Some here driving hours for what will no doubt become a collector's item.
He wanted to be one of the first one in his class to get the new coin.
Officials with the Mint say it may be a little while longer before you get one of these at the cash register. Entering new coins into circulation takes time. Nicole Williams, CBC News, Ottawa.
Weather Update is brought to you by the Art and Beauty of the National Ballet of Ukraine. January 29th at the Burton Cummings Theatre. Tickets at nationalballetukraine.com.
Coins coming to a cushion near you were saying, a couch cushion or a vending machine.
I wonder how long that's going to take, really.
to get them in circulation and get them lost. So, John, there's a meteor shower.
Meteor shower, it's the Geminid meteor shower. Now, this is one of the better ones of the year, and the good thing about tonight is that we don't have a full moon. We don't have much moonlight at all, so the sky is pretty dark. Have a look at this. So you'll look over to the eastern sky, and the other good thing about the Geminids is that they arrive a little bit earlier. You don't have to stay up until like 3 or 4 in the morning. You could probably see something tonight. Now, these peak tonight and tomorrow, but really Thursday is the better day to see them. So tomorrow night, and I'm expecting relatively clear skies through both of the nights. And look at this, tomorrow night up to 120 meteors per hour. So best thing to do is, well, first of all, have a nap and then dress like you're going to the moon. I know it's not going to be that cold, but when you're standing outside that long, you'll need to stay warm and then get away from city lights. And it seems like for seeing northern lights or for seeing something like this, maybe Birds Hill Park might work. It's relatively close to the city, but it's dark enough. Look at the temperatures. We're getting a 4 in Eli. That's a +4. -3 in Winnipeg. So, yeah, -2 still down at the Forks. The normal high is -10 degrees. And these 4s are Eli out toward Portage, Morden, Winkler at 4 degrees right now, still 0 in Brandon. But sometimes just on the western edge of the Red River Valley, we will see temperatures elevated slightly. It's over 0 in the Paw, 0 in Flin Flon, -5 in Thompson, -10 in Churchill. And the forecast conditions for tomorrow, not just here in the south, but up through northern Manitoba, are very, very mild as well. These are the lows tonight. -3s and -4s. We'll see clearing skies overnight in northwestern Ontario. Relatively clear skies here. A few clouds through the evening, but hopefully clear enough to see the Geminid meteor shower. A low of -2 in Winnipeg. -2s and -3s pretty much all across the southeast. And the southwest, we're looking at temperatures that in some cases stay above 0. Portage, Dauphin at +1 with clear skies, -2 though in Swan River. The lows tonight across the north are much warmer than they should be. We'll see some clearing in the evening in Island Lake, and a windy day tomorrow in Churchill, northwest 50 to 70, but a high of 3 degrees. Otherwise, 1s and 2s and decent amount of sunshine all across the north. We'll see lots of sunshine here in southern Manitoba, 3 to maybe 5 or 6 around Portage, Morden, Winkler. Emerson be around 6 or 7 degrees, 4 in Winnipeg, lots of 3s and 4s here with nothing but clear sky and clear skies, and as high as 7 degrees tomorrow in northwestern Ontario and Fort Frances, 3 in Kenora and Red Lake.
Thanks very much, John.
You're welcome.
It has the potential to be the biggest project to revamp Winnipeg's downtown in the past half-century. Coming up, we'll hear what a new partnership means for the transformation of both Portage Place Mall and the old Bay Building in Winnipeg's downtown. CBC Winnipeg News will be right back. The Southern Chiefs Organization and True North Real Estate Development have revealed details of their new downtown collaboration. SCO plans to transform the Bay Building into a place for economic and social opportunity where First Nation heritage is celebrated. True North wants to build housing and a healthcare center at Portage Place. It's viewing the project as social redevelopment first and a real estate development second. So what difference could that make to Winnipeg's downtown? This morning, Information Radio's Emily Brass spoke with Kate Fensky, the CEO of the Downtown Winnipeg Biz.
This really is a monumental step forward for both economic and social reconciliation and the transformation of downtown Winnipeg. And when I think about it, what was so evident yesterday is that we are going to be doing things in a different way. There is a level of collaboration happening in this city that we haven't seen in decades. And what that can do is we can just achieve such greater results. And I think it's so exciting. You know, we've got the right partners in place, the right pieces for these two projects that we weren't sure what the future was going to be.
What do you think's inspiring that spirit of collaboration?
I think we've learned over, especially the last couple of years, that it's really challenging to do things on your own. And, you know, in order to get the right results for community, you need to have so many different voices and partners at the table to make that happen, that we all play a part in the transformation of our downtown. And in order for our downtown to be successful, we all need to figure out, you know, how we can contribute. And I think one of the reasons why it's so important, especially these two projects led by True North and by Southern Chiefs Organization, our downtown has to be successful in order for our city and our province to be successful. And that's what we heard at the announcement yesterday from decision makers, from the Premier to the Mayor to the federal government. We've got all parties on board to make this happen.
And, you know, it's not a power couple we've heard about before, SCO and True North working together. Like, why is it important that those two groups that are pretty different come together?
Yeah, it's really exciting. You know, I think when we first heard about these projects, I mean, both of them on their own would be game changers for downtown, but they're across the street from each other. And when we look at the opportunities, you know, both of them are looking at bringing in more housing, which is so critical both for our city but for our downtown. We need more residents living downtown as things have shifted in terms of not as many workers, but also community amenities and supports. And that's really what's critical for our downtown, is that we're creating a neighborhood for the people, the 18,000 people that already live downtown. What are the things that they are going to need? But also as we grow and as we shift and as we change. So when I think about reconciliation and how Winnipeg is really leading in that area in Canada, this is something that we haven't seen before. You know, you have a private company that is locally invested, and you have Southern Chiefs Organization working closely together to find where there's opportunities. So we're talking about training opportunities for Indigenous peoples, education opportunities, housing, and sharing of resources. I think it's just a different way at looking at how we do development, and it's really exciting.
What else stood out to you about this Southern Chiefs and True North announcement?
You know, I think I've been getting some questions from folks just in the last 24 hours, like, do I think this is really going to happen? Do we actually think that these projects that you know, 3 years from now, we're going to see them complete? And I do. I'm more optimistic than I've been, you know, since 2019 about the future of our downtown. And when you look at, you know, yes, there's been a 6-month extension on the purchase of Portage Place. That makes sense. Absolutely. They are doing their due diligence. They are consulting with the community. Southern Chiefs Organization, I had a tour of Wayway-Nebaga Kinagon, and in there, and they're really doing that project very carefully, making sure that they are archiving historic artifacts, that they are putting more material into recycling than landfill. So both of these leaders in our community are taking their care and caution with these projects to make sure they're done right. We still have a long way to go. When we look at Portage Avenue, you know, in our zone, we've got a 30% ground floor vacancy. And what's really critical for businesses right now is businesses need people, customers. And so it's also, you know, what does our downtown look like? How are we judged when people come here and visit? So there's some basic infrastructure things along Portage Avenue that really could use some investment. If we've got, you know, Indigenous governments and organizations and private sector investing in our downtown, we need to make sure as well that governments are looking at what role can they play. And we heard that yesterday from the Premier and the Mayor, that they want to support these projects, make sure they're successful, but downtown overall as a whole.
Emily Brass speaking with Kate Fensky. John Sauter's got your 7-day forecast when we return, and then we'll bring you the Daily Lift. Stay with us.
Well, we've been talking about warm temperatures, but how about the lack of snow? This is a radar image that winter sport enthusiasts just don't want to see. There's absolutely nothing going on here in Manitoba, and already we are way down on how much snow we should have. There is a storm system brewing to the south. Most of the models are keeping that up into Minnesota as we head into Friday, so it looks like it will stay to the south of us. Almanac, well, there are the normals, nowhere near that. Look at the record low, minus 39.4. And only 2 years later, it was a record high at 6.7, but well over 100 years ago. We're warm the next few days, and then on into the weekend, we are still very mild, -1 Saturday, -3 Sunday, -3s and -4s next week. At Shaughnessy Park School near Keewatin Street and Selkirk Avenue in Winnipeg, an annual concert offers more than just Christmas tunes to the community.
Right. It also gives students from preschool to grade 8 the chance to be involved in the arts. For your Daily Lift tonight, CBC's Jim Agapito takes us to a rehearsal for a concert called Sneezy the Snowman.
Okay, go on in. Come and stand over here. Right now we're getting ready for our winter concert, and that's all of our students in nursery, kindergarten, grades 1, 2, and 3, 7, 8 band. We are gonna run through all of our songs back to back like we did last class. For our kiddos, a lot of the times the only arts education that they're getting is what happens in our building. So the only time they're getting music education is what they get from me.
If I could fly like a snowflake, I'll never ever fly.
This is the big opportunity for those students to get to perform and go through the process of putting on a production, go through the process of rehearsing and performing and learning music and learning repertoire. Eyes on me. This is like a tradition in our community. This is something that families look forward to. This is something kids look forward to. This is something that grandparents come into town for. This is something that aunts and uncles come for.
Can warm me on a cold night.
It's so much fun and it's a huge privilege, but it's a lot of work. But it's so good on that concert day when you see the lights come up and the kiddos are on stage and then they hear the crowd and the crowd always blows up. And the kids are so excited and they are so proud, and it is such a rush. And like I sometimes cry on stage because it's so cool to see what the kids can accomplish and what the kids can do.
Snowman, snowman, where you go?
Oh, that's so cute.
You know, it seems like kids at that age, they're not quite old enough to get nervous. They get more excited about performing in front of their families. And
Yeah,
really nice.
it's so cute. And thank you to all the people who work so hard to put on those concerts for Grandma and Grandpa and Bubba and everybody.
It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work, and it means a lot. So, and probably at times you're like, you know. Thank you for being with us.
Have a great night.
See you tomorrow.